This episode is brought to you by Indie Film Hustle TV, the world's first streaming service dedicated to filmmakers, screenwriters, and content creators. Learn more at indiefilmhustle.tv. I'd like to welcome to the show Chris Moore, man. How you doing, Chris?
I'm good. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing really great. I've been a fan of yours from back in the day, not even during obviously Good Will Hunting and all that, but specifically this little show you did called Project Greenlight. And I have to ask you, man, season 2, why didn't I make the top 10, man? I made the top 25, man. Why didn't I make the top 10?
I wish I could remember. I'm sure there was a reason, though.
I'm sure there was.
But the other thing to remember is that we didn't. I guess I was in charge of the top 10, so I'll take that hit.
But I'm busting your balls. People always like, because on my IMDb, I'm on Project Greenlight season 2, and they're like, were you on Project Greenlight? I go, yes, for 3 seconds in the opening montage of Project Greenlight 2, because I had to send in. I got to the level of at least sending in a director video.
Yeah.
So, and we'll talk about Project Greenlight in a little bit, but I just wanted to bust your balls a bit.
Fair enough. I mean, I'm so old, Alex, that I'm sure there's a story for almost anyone who runs into me at this point. Those are the hardest, is because the fact that no one became a big star coming out of Project Greenlight. I mean, people had careers, and it definitely helped people and that kind of stuff. I can't speak to the 4th season. I wasn't involved, but a lot of people are like, well, if this guy wasn't such a genius, one of the winners, why didn't I win? And you're like, dude, that was like 15 years ago. I can't remember. I just know we made our decisions. I had somebody stop me in an airport this Thanksgiving, 15 days ago.
No.
Like, aren't you Chris Moore from Project Greenlight? And I felt like saying no, but I was like, I think that's a dick move to be like, no. And so I was like, yes, long time ago. He's like, I never got over not making the top 3. And I was like, oh my God. Like I don't know what to say. Like, I'm so sorry. It's like those people that won sucked.
Oh, Jesus.
Fair enough. That's why being in the film business is tough, because everybody judges everybody.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. All right, man. So let's go back a bit. How did you get started, and why did you want to be in this insane business?
Well, the hard part about that question is the first answer. I'll answer the second question first, which is I never set out to be in the business. I am the worst sort of how did they get there stories, because shit just kept happening to me and I just rolled along with it. As I say to people, I'm not trying to be falsely modest. I clearly had an okay ability to identify talent or good scripts or whatever it might be. But I actually think that was just because I grew up in small town in Maryland and love movies. So like I came with a predisposed, like sort of saying, how did you get into basketball or what are you doing? It's like, well, I happen to be 7'2". And you're like, you don't have any control over that. Like, and you decide it's good you liked it, because if you decide you wanted to be a jockey, being 7'2" is not a good idea. But so I would say I got lucky. I came out here. The quick story is when I was in college at Harvard in Boston, to get all that out of the way, I worked as a PA, and then I sort of graduated up to other jobs in live television sports. And I thought I was going to work in television sports. And over time, by the time I had graduated, I decided to move out here. 2 of my best friends were coming out here and had a sweet place. They were working on Wall Street, but for here. And they had a sweet place in Manhattan Beach. And I knew that the entertainment business was sort of startup kind of money. You're not going to be paying for a sweet place in Manhattan Beach. So I was like, sounds good to get away from everyone in warm weather. So I ended up in California living with them. And a friend of mine who I had met through, I'd working as a PA on a television show for USA Network and was sort of checking it out, seeing what's going on, said, this little agency that I work for is expanding. They've just recruited 4 agents from the other big agencies, and we don't have enough people. You want to come just work, check out an agency? And I thought, that might be interesting to see how you sell stuff, do whatever. I was actually only going to be in LA for 6 months because I owed a semester to college. So I was going to go back in the spring. So I was like, I'll go work for 5-6 months at this agency, see what it's like, and it really was For the old people, they can remember the Saturday Night Live skit. It really was making copies and getting coffee and delivering packages and shit, all of which is digital now, except the coffee.
Right.
But I liked it. I really love reading scripts. You know, we had to read like 10, 15 scripts a week and give them my thoughts. And it was kind of fun to be at that beginning phase where you say, this could be a great movie. And then, you know, it sells. And then, you know, I wasn't there long enough to see anything get made, but I had a lot of fun. So they then, I guess, liked me and said, look, when you come back from college, we'd love you to come back and keep working here. So I really sort of was like, okay, that's a good job. My parents are going to want me to have a job, and it paid, and I'll work in the mailroom. And then when I got back after my, you know, that last semester to LA, the agency had expanded again and brought in some more people. And so they didn't even put me back in the mailroom. I became an assistant to an agent. And then I moved up to one of the sort of founding agent's desk after about 3 or 4 months. And then they expanded again and needed like young agents at the time. One of your big jobs as a young agent was to go out and sort of just gather information. You weren't experienced enough to, you know, have clients of your own, but you go out and and so you got territories and you'd be in charge of territories. And so myself and another assistant got promoted, and we were sort of these, you know, junior guys who just drive around all day to studios and networks and other places and, you know, sort of learn what they needed. You know, did they need writers on this project? Did they need actors on that project? Did they need, you know, we want a horror movie for Halloween, shit like that. And I was primarily in the movie business. And so anyway, I was doing that, and then I ended up finding some scripts that sold and some movies that got made. And I ended up signing some young talents early, you know, from Sundance and from, you know, film festivals, and, you know, had an okay run as an agent. And, you know, and I realized, and this is going to make me sound like the dumbest person on earth, but I got frustrated with, I would fall in love with these visions of these scripts, and I would sell using the vision. And then by the time they got made, they were not good. And I was always like, the fuck happened? Excuse me. What happened? Like maybe there's a job I could have where at least I had more of a chance to be part of the whole process. So the small agency I was working for was called Intertalent. And it sold. It basically, some of the founding partners got in a fight. A group went to UTA and a group went to ICM. And I went to ICM for a year, but the big agency business is very different than the small agency business. And so after a year, I raised $1 million, you know, in 1992, and made a little movie that's out there called Glory Days that happened to star a guy named Ben Affleck. And, you know, Ben came in and auditioned, and I was paying the casting director out of my pocket, and he was great. And I liked him a lot. And so we gave him the lead in the movie. And then as we made that movie and I learned a ton about it, this is a great way to learn, is to be the financier and the producer of a little movie, because you get to see everything, and it's a huge nightmare. And I'm sure I'm going to die earlier than I would have having done that. But I learned a ton, and I became friends with Ben, and I'd known Matt a little bit in college, but we weren't friends. And then I knew him through Ben, but my reputation as a young literary agent was pretty good. I've been profiled in some magazines, some other stuff. So Ben just said, look, my buddy and I wrote this script. Would you read this script and tell me what you think? And I was petrified because, you know, actors, writers, directors can go one way or the other. They either can be super, you know, sort of stuck on themselves and it's hard, or they can actually be really talented. And that's probably true of other people, but actors in particular. Anyway, I didn't read it for a while because we were still shooting the little movie, and I didn't want to have to tell Ben I hated his script while he was shooting the movie we were making. And but I read it and I thought it was awesome. Like, I literally was like, look, dude, you don't want to give this to me. I'm a little producer trying to start out. You could sell this for $1 million. Like, I can just tell you that right now. This is a great script. And he got with Matt, and then we wrapped shooting, and we sat down, we thought about it, and they told me they wanted to star in it, and they wanted to do it. I said, well, that's going to be a little harder because no one's heard of any of you. But I was like, you still could probably sell it. You'll probably get faced with the question of star in it, less money, more money, don't star in it. So anyway, the rest was sort of history. And that's why I say that's a bad story of, I came out before I graduated college, worked in a mailroom, got a job, became an agent. All happened within a 3-year period of time. I had produced Good Will Hunting. And so the point is that you can't say to anybody in the hustle, copy that, because that was pure luck and a little bit of taste, right? I mean, there were other people that read that first draft of Good Will Hunting and were like, I'm not sure this is very good. So all I can say is I was smart enough to know, some of the guys I worked with very early in the career, like Night Shyamalan, Rich Wilkes, Zach Penn. Some of these guys are big writers now and directors and whatever. And then Matt and Ben, obviously. And so the point is that that's the only thing I can say. I was okay at being able to read or look and watch something and be like, I really like that. Maybe if I'm lucky enough, if I really like it, other people will like it. And I'm sure if your favorite movie is, some obscure Japanese film, that's harder because your natural taste isn't, my favorite movies are like Die Hard, right? I think Die Hard is close to a perfect movie.
And the greatest Christmas movie of all time.
Exactly.
There's no
Everyone
question.
should get ready to watch it over the next 6 weeks. But so that's what I try to say to people who might be listening or thinking about it is, you got to lean into your talents. You have to think about what it is. And some of it is luck in this business.
I think I agree with you 100%. So many people, and trust me, from when I was coming up, I try to study everybody else's path. So you try to go down Robert Rodriguez's path or Kevin Smith's path or Ben and Matt's path. I mean, how many actors after Good Will Hunting's like, we're gonna write a movie and we're gonna
they weren't first. I mean, Sylvester Stallone.
Oh God,
famous.
Of course. I mean, yeah, of course.
Rocky. Like, so
you dropped the mic.
Rocky? That's awesome.
Exactly. But for that generation, they were big inspiration. And the funny thing is, and this is just, a couple of old farts talking, with age, you realize that there is no path you can take from somebody else. You might be inspired by somebody else's path, but it's truly your own path that is, because every single one of those people I just mentioned, from Ed Burns, from Spike Lee, all of those 90s directors that we all idolize, they all had different paths. They all went down different paths. None of them were like, well, Kevin went down the Robert Rodriguez path. No, he didn't. He did his own thing. He was inspired by Rick Linklater, Slacker, and so many people were. And so it's just, I just wanted to put that out there for people. As much as you want to kind of emulate somebody else's path, I promise you it will never work. But you could be inspired by it and move forward, going forward. Now, obviously your history with finding talent and, especially with Project Greenlight and The Chair and things like that, that you're always looking for directing talent. Is there something you look for specifically in a director?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, what I would say is I still love sort of professional storytelling. And my view is I take this larger historic view that humans need storytelling. I don't know why. I'm not a psych guy. I didn't study any of that shit, but I know that it's valuable. And I know that it's valuable on the escape entertainment side. And I know it's valuable on the just learn about stuff or having catharsis or whatever. And I've been very fortunate to be part of all of those kinds of projects. The thing that I would say about a director in specific is I believe, and I think we're actually in the heyday of it right now, which is there is the right medium for all kinds of stories. And the point is that, yes, when the Brothers Grimm were out there just walking around the forest telling stories to people, that's the only choice they had. But the truth of the matter is not every Grimm's fairy tale should be filmed with a camera and a crew, right? And so what I look for in a director is, why did they pick this story to film and tell as a movie or a television show, right? Because if you don't make it better than it was, right, on paper, or better than it was when somebody told you the story in a podcast, or better than it was as a graphic novel, there's no reason to direct it. So as a director, you have to prove to me that you're going to take this and make it better, right? And use the skills of what I call, audio, visual effects, music you get to use all of those tools to really knock me down with how great this story is. So like to me, you use all those 90 directors. I think a few of them, Kevin Smith being one, and I think it's actually happened, is he could have done Clerks as a podcast and it would have been super funny. Mm-hmm. And it would have worked. And he's got the whole Smodcast network and he's got a bunch of podcasts, and he under his dialogue is unbelievable. His characters are unbelievable. What he does with the camera was the genre or the medium that was available for him then. Right? What he would do now, he still makes movies every now and then, and those are different. They have effects and they do whatever. But I think Kevin's a guy who would say to you, I just want to tell these great stories about these people and these characters and situations, and however is best to tell them, I'll tell them. Right? Robert loves effects, loves us. And again, I don't know these guys well. I've met them. But the point is that you look at Robert, he's got Troublemaker. He loves, turning. So Robert needs to be in this genre. You're not, the podcast of Spy Kids isn't fun. Right?
Right.
Like
you need to see the visuals.
Like, woohoo! Yeah, I'm going to go listen to Spy Kids. Right? That isn't how it's going to work. So I think that, for me, what it is a director or I call him sort of professional storyteller saying, I decided this is the best way to tell this story, right? And I'm going to come in and show you that you want to give your story. If I'm the producer, if I'm the writer, if I'm the rights holder of the story, you want to give it to me because I'm going to take the tools of writing, directing, working with actors, working with composers, and I'm going to make this story badass, right? And that's what I look for in a director is, well, what would this have been if I just read it as a novel?
Right.
Right. Would I have liked this story just as much? Right. What would it be? And that's, I think new because now there's way more professional ways to be a storyteller than there used to be where you can make a living. And that's the kind of thing I did when I was an agent. I'd say, look, this thing, maybe you should do this as a graphic novel, or maybe this would be really cool as a play. Right. Or maybe this is an animated piece because you can do really funny stuff with animation that you can't really get away with in live action. Right. So I think part of it, when you look at a director, because I still look at a director or a sort of episodic showrunner, also as sort of the leader of the whole thing. Right. The sort of vision, and I'm not a believer in committee. I think you want one or two people who are really the creative center of any project. But I think you really want them to see and have a vision for why it's better this way or that way. Not they did it that way because somebody would pay them to do it, or they did whatever. And you see a lot of what I would call, sort of people who are really good at one-off storytelling have moved into limited series, right? 6 episodes, 5 episodes. That's, to me, a movie. That's anything else. It's you're telling one story over a period of time. In that case, you have more episodes, so you can get more into it, right? Mm-hmm. But the point is that's also because the buyers seem to be interested in that, right?
Right.
So when I do these, I always say to people, think about what Good Will Hunting would be today. How would we have made Good Will Hunting today? I'm not sure it would have been a $25 million movie, right?
Right.
It could have been a bunch of episodes. Hell, it could have been a podcast. It's just Ben and Matt's characters talking to each other about how the hell to get out of Southie.
Which would have then
led to other stuff. But
right.
It's like, how does a story get out into the world? And so for a director, that's a big part. And then the other thing for a writer is not that you asked, but just to answer it is, did they capture a story? And I always read things twice because there's the first time where it's all new, right? And then it's the second time when you know everything that's about to happen. Do you still like it? Mm-hmm. And that's it. Just did I like it? I look at myself more as a consumer who was buying early than I am.
You're an early investor.
Expert in anything, right? I still see 20 movies a week. I watch shows all the time.
It's all about, and this is the one thing that filmmakers and screenwriters don't understand, is that you can't teach taste. Taste is something you are programmed with at the factory and developed over the course of your life. There is nothing you can do. And that's why when I work with collaborators as a director, I'm looking for taste. Because you can teach craft. You can teach technique, but taste, man, is just like, Oh, it's so difficult.
You're 100% right. And the thing that makes taste so hard to quantify is I think taste weirdly can be muted or affected by mood. So like I think that and mood is something that none of us have any real control over, right? So like you can, the mood of the world today is different because of COVID, because of the economy, because of partisanship if you're in America, because of whatever, right? Mood, as you said, we're two older guys, right? So our mood and what we might respond to is going to be different than potentially what we responded to when we were 25, right?
Amen.
And so part of it is also looking at yourself and saying, what am I looking at, or who am I speaking for? Who else is in the same sort of move or frame of mind that I'm in? Because I think there's other ones like today I just need to get away and I want to go somewhere fantastical. Like I've been watching Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings with my 14-year-old recently, and it's like fun. I'm always like, yeah, dude, let's go back. Okay, let's get in there. Let's go to Middle Earth, right? And that works, and I loved it when it came out. It's not like I've watched it 10 times between when it came out till now. My 14-year-old just got interested, so I'm watching it again. That's different than, watching something that's more serious or more interesting or more about grown-ups. I actually really like this Spencer movie about Princess Di. I will say I've seen a little too much Princess Di in the last, 2 years. But that one was weird because it's basically a study of how you just fall into craziness, like your life. And so I was fascinated as an older person who've had people I've known for 40, 50 years of my life who go crazy, sort of watching somebody do that I thought they did it really well. And now I couldn't recommend that. I wouldn't go on out and say, hey, everybody should watch this movie. You got to be in the frame of mind that you want to watch somebody go crazy, right? But I think that's and I certainly would never want to marry into the royal family. I'll tell you that.
Oh, no. Yes.
But anyway, that's what I think is interesting about, professional storytelling right now is there's a lot of options. There's a lot of way to do it. Some are more lucrative than others, but
now there's I heard you once talk about 3 leverage points in producing, which I found fascinating, and I never heard it clarified so beautifully. Can you please talk about the 3 leverage points of being a producer? Because producing is such a nebulous thing, and you actually put a couple things that could help you.
The embarrassing part of this moment is you're gonna have to remind me which 3 I talked about on that one. I mean, I have the 3. What I always go with, so this may be the 3 you're talking about, is that there's the material, there's sort of the money and distribution, that can be divided into 2 or can be 1, and then there's the talent.
That's the one. Yeah.
And in my view, for a producer, you're really only value. Yes, there is a skill set to producing, sort of like what you said about craft. There are things you learn as a producer about how to make deals, how to sell stuff, how to budget stuff, how to manage people on set. But somebody could, throw me into a construction project and I could probably figure out how to manage it relatively quickly. There's a skill set, but producers don't really have a craft, as it were. We're salespeople, we're taste, right?
Makers,
and then we're management of the humans that you need to make it, right? So your power or your leverage comes from the 3 areas that you have to have. And so at certain periods, like when the internet was less prevalent, I had 4, which was there's eyeballs, people who can get you to eyeballs, and distributors were a lot bigger. Now with YouTube and the internet and all this other stuff, you have a lot more power yourself to reach eyeballs, right? You may not know how to monetize it. You may not be doing paid advertising, but you can put stuff out there. And over time, some stuff does get just discovered because people liked it, right? But money is still important. Particularly audiovisual professional storytelling is expensive. It's not, even if you're doing a $250,000 movie, that's still a shitload more expensive than many other things you could do, right? And so it's like, so there's money. And so a lot of producers come from the money side. They come from the, I'm going to get you your money, or I'm going to put the money in, or I am rich and then I'm going to bring other people, right? So those 2 areas, you can either work for a distributor, A24 trusts you and you can get A24 to pick you up. So that gives you some power, or rich guy number 2 loves you, and whatever you bring them, they'll give you half the budget, so that's one version of power. I personally came the other way, which is talent and story, or like the project itself, material. That I never really was a rights guy. I've bought some life rights, but I've never really bought books or anything like that, which has put me in a bad spot right now as a producer, because right now we're in a weird moment in the business where some sort of past life for the material IP seems to be necessary.
Yeah.
It seems to, the IP, and I've always been a believer that movies and television could create value. And most of the successes on my resume, Greenlight you've talked about, Good Will Hunting we've talked about, American Pie, those were original ideas that were made in either film or TV, right? Today, they'd probably say, go do it somewhere else first. Let us know people like it, and then we'll make a movie out of it. Or then, very rarely today do you see original material coming through movies and television.
So let me ask you this, Chris, then. Why is it that, because right now Hollywood is mining the 70s, 80s, and 90s for material and IP. That's basically, we're just getting rehashes, remakes, everything in a time period where they allowed creativity to come up with original ideas like Gremlins and do you think Goonies would be made in today's world, or even Gremlins would be, or even Good Will Hunting would have never been made by a studio in today's world? Out of 25 million, that's like a dead zone, $25 million. Yeah. It just wouldn't make any sense. So what is it? Why do you think, from your point of view, is the studio so just resistant to new ideas? Or you've got to be James Cameron to come in with $500 million to make an original IP, which is Avatar.
Well, the irony is the answer to that question is the same answer, actually, which is the entertainment industry, if I can go back just a tiny bit, has had basically 100 years where they own the audience. They had complete control over the audience. And it was basically 4 or 5 companies in America, right? They would tell the movie theaters what movies they were coming out with. They would put on what they thought was necessary on the television channels. If you were at home, like I grew up in a small town in Maryland, you're just waiting around to see what's going to be available Friday night, right? You have no control, and there's not a lot of choices, right? There's no video games competing against it. There's no social media. I can't just go on YouTube and go down a rabbit hole for 3 hours. There's no TikTok. It's literally, they own you, right? And the 2 things that they own are the scarcity of product. So you have no other movies. Like when home video came, they all got nervous. Well, maybe now we're not going to own people, because you might be home and decide, I'd rather watch Die Hard again this Christmas than go see whatever the new Christmas movie is, right? Mm-hmm. But what they found was people still liked the experience of seeing the new thing, and they actually just watched double. They still watch Die Hard. And so I would say we hit a heyday in the big DVDs, big cable channels, big foreign markets, that people were just making money all over the place. And now I would say it's late 80s into early 2000s, right? It was just a machine for money. And the reason was because of marketing, right? The reason was they could aim people at stuff, and 100 million people worldwide would do it.
Yeah. Right.
That isn't possible anymore.
Right.
It's just not possible, because that 100 million people today has way more choices.
Oh, yeah.
They have video games. They have TikTok. They also have all these older movies that are now available on their screen, that because they have these subscriptions, right? Secondly, the economics of the business, again, because of marketing, are not really driven by opening weekend anymore. They talk about it, they push it, but it's not a condensed period of time, right? So it doesn't matter. You can be Netflix and it comes out next week, and then people find it. Like Queen's Gambit, it was like 2 months after it came out, people started finding it. Squid Game was 7 months after it first was available on Netflix that it became big, right? Like the point is, they don't care. They just want people to keep coming back to Netflix. So whenever you find it, you find it, right?
Yeah.
So what that did is it made marketing to make something matter become, in my opinion, way over important. And so to your example, it's either IP people have heard of, which they think they're going to want to see in this new medium, which is only 50% at best actually reliable to get people to come, right? And then it was talent. And talent has become way more valuable. So Jim Cameron in Avatar is possible because people want to see what Jim Cameron does. And there's one Avatar people really liked. So dropping $500 million on that makes a lot more sense, right? Because you can Jim Cameron's new movie, and it's an Avatar, right?
And it's the technology and everything he was doing. It's all this stuff,
right?
Yeah,
so you're, and also I bet it's going to be one you're going to have a better experience watching it in a theater, no matter how big your home screening room is.
Correct.
Right. And so the point is that those things get a lot of attention, and then anything else that can spark a article, interview, people want to see. Now, over time, that has been diminishing. There's very few stars now that are guaranteed big successes. There's very few, but they still are bigger success. Red Notice is still going to be bigger for Netflix, than a movie that doesn't have The Rock, Gal Gadot, and Ryan Reynolds, right? But my example, when I use that example, when I'm speaking in colleges and stuff, what I say to them is think about it for a second. That should be seen as the example of the end, right? Like to some extent, that movie should be recognized in our business as the jumping of the shark. And some older people don't know what that means, but it's an analogy to a show called Happy Days that was wildly popular and had a character, the Fonz, who rode a motorcycle, wore a leather jacket. And they got into their 5th, I think, or 7th season, and they had nothing to do. And people still love the characters. And they literally had an episode where Fonzie, this, guy, goes water skiing and jumps a shark. And you're sort of like, that is literally, and that became this word in the business, this phrase of, you have now gone so far off the sort of creative drive, right? Mm-hmm. That you're literally having Fonzie jump a shark. Like you got nothing else in your mind. And so what I'd say is Red Notice is, look, they had to have 3 of the biggest stars in the world in the movie to get any attention, right?
You're absolutely right.
And so you look at it and you're like, it's basically, look, I think those are 3 of the most charismatic performers we have out there, right? I did a movie years ago with Ryan Reynolds called Waiting, and he is super entertaining, like just unstoppable. I think The Rock is so charismatic. And Gal Gadot has proven to be very charismatic. She can be funny, act like I saw it, I was like, yeah, I'm definitely watching that movie, right? Mm-hmm. But when I watched it, I was like, it's sort of this phrase of all sizzle and no steak, right? Like I was like, it's fine. It has all the stuff there.
It was good. It's fine.
But if you're going to sit down and bring The Rock, Ryan Reynolds, and Gal Gadot together, you should fucking blow me out of the water. You should be like, holy shit, that was awesome.
It should be it should be Die Hard meets Lethal Weapon meets The Predator.
Or like Spider-Man is coming out in 2 days, and it's like some reviews have been, the best Spider-Man ever, and other reviews have been, well, whatever. It's you got Doctor Strange, and you got the multiverse. I'm worried I'm just going to be totally confused. But my kids, we bought 9 tickets to the first show because they're desperate to go see it. But the point is that we might be at the moment of volume right now where all these streamers and everybody wants so many product that everyone is jumping the shark. That like the whole business is jumping the shark right now.
No, it's a great analogy. You're absolutely right, because I've been saying for a long time, people are like, I need to get a movie star in there. I'm like, look, if you can get a movie star, and the term movie star is not what it used to be, because before Tom Cruise could read a telephone book and it would open to 20 million. I mean, Will Smith could do the same thing back in the day. Yeah. Remember Arnold, and they just showed up and it was $20 million, $30 million opening. Those days are gone because it's just so much dilution. But as an independent filmmaker, if you can get a star or a recognizable face in your film, it's always better than not having that. Like, I'm not sure Good Will Hunting would have gone without Robin. Like
I can tell you right now, it wouldn't have gone without Robin. I mean, that's 100% true. I mean, Matt was on his way. He had done Rainmaker and some other stuff. So maybe 2 years later, he would have been enough. Or, Ben had been in Chasing Amy and other stuff. So they might, but the reason it got made when it got made was solely Robin Williams. And
that budget too. That wasn't a small budget.
No. I mean, today, $25 million for a movie like that, they'd look at you like you've lost your mind.
That's in today's world, that's a $3 million, $5 million tops, depending on the star.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's no way.
And if Robin was in it, it still would have been that, but he would have owned 50% of the movie.
On the back end. Absolutely.
Right. So, God rest his soul.
God, he was, I had the pleasure of meeting him once, and it was just, God rest his soul, man. So, sorry. So you got Good Will Hunting off the ground as your second feature film, which is not a bad thing. Oscar nominations and, Ben and Matt and all this kind of stuff. Man, what was it like just being in the center of that hurricane, dude? Because I remember that. Everybody was talking about that movie that year.
You're being generous to say I was in the center of it. I was more, Toto in the basket of, the witch flying around the hurricane. I would say they were in the center. They were very loyal and nice guys to keep me around. That doesn't happen as much anymore for producers, where the talent that help you get your first movie made the producers don't get carried nearly like they did. But it was intense. I mean, it was, and I think having it be the three of us, and to some extent their agent, Patrick Weitzel, who I had also worked with as an agent when I was an agent, the four of us, and then they have a lawyer that's been with them a long time named Sam Fisher. There was a lot of calming of, let's figure out the best way to take advantage. And to some extent, Matt and Ben made different choices as actors as they went forward, but they're still together. They still produced together. They did The Last Duel, they wrote together, and they did other stuff. So I think what it was it was also the heyday for Miramax. Mm-hmm. I know Harvey is a bad person to talk about, and he is a bad person. I'm not trying to make, but that version of Miramax at that time, they were owned by Disney and they were doing whatever. They were on fire, and I'm sure Robert would talk about that, or Quentin, or Lawrence Bender. We were in there at Kevin, this moment. Kevin Smith. It would be going. So there was a lot that we were part of, and what they always said, which I respected about them, was, okay, we got here. Like, what are we going to do with it? And so they have always tried to get some projects a little bit harder made. They've always tried to help people move forward and use their star power or whatever to advance other stuff. But they also want to become giant stars, and they did.
Very much so.
And I respect them immensely I got to produce with them and be partners with them. And then we started this internet thing called Live Planet together. And, we saw a lot that their celebrity let me have access to that I never would have had as a producer. And then I had this great luxury where I also was doing the American Pie movies that had nothing to do with them.
Right.
So I was very lucky that I could sort of make the argument that I was doing all right as a producer, and I was working with Matt and Ben. Right. And, and it's one of those things where it was crazy. I mean, we were making stuff, but like Project Greenlight, as an example, was where the celebrity and the sort of well-knownness got an idea that nobody really liked off the ground. And it was a surprise success because the three of us could be on camera and could do stuff and sort of became likable enough that HBO was like, okay, let's keep doing this. Right. And, and that's an example. But then you have, all the Bruckheimer movies that Ben did. You have the other stuff, when Matt got brought into the Bourne movies, like all that stuff had nothing to do with me. And I'm really happy for them. And they knew what they wanted from the beginning. I mean, these are guys who've been, you asked me when we first started, did you know? I had no idea. I was kicking around doing whatever, and this worked out. These two guys were driving down to New York to audition for stuff when they were in high school, when they were, they wanted to be movie stars and wanted to be players and wanted to be creators since they can remember. I cannot say that. I happen to be the dude who recognized it, got lucky, and rode it as long as we possibly could. Right.
Yeah.
But the point is that so what I'd say is that whirlwind was really weird. And there were some bad decisions that got made. There was some overwhelming stuff that happened. There's a lot of projects we set up that are never going to get made that, we probably overused our position within, Miramax and the universe. But ultimately it was just like sort of going through the whole process. I think a lot of people go through in overdrive. It just happened a shitload faster. Mm-hmm. Right. And so it was just like, all of a sudden we were like 28, 30, and they'd won Oscars. We'd had $100 million hits. We had an office with 6 employees developing stuff. We had TV shows. We had documentaries. We were doing all of this stuff. And it was just going so fast that it also, I don't think, had a chance to survive over time because, you were going too fast. Like
it's too much. You can't sustain that. You can't sustain it.
Handle.
Sure.
And, we all had our ways of dealing with it. And that's when Sean Bailey, who joined later in the process, who's now the president of the Walt Disney Pictures, same thing. We just went buck wild up until sort of the mid 2000s. And then it was sort of like, okay, what are we really doing? And that's the weird thing of like, it's a little better than we ever expected it to be, but it's also different. So now is this what we really want to do? Is we want to have a company, want to do whatever. And I think that ultimately they are just awesome talent and really smart and really talented. And Sean is an unbelievable executive. And I'm sort of this flaky dude on the outside who likes to push stuff. And, I'm not really built for corporate Hollywood, and I'm not really a talent. And I really love, sort of working on projects I really care about. And the success of American Pie and the success of, some of the other stuff allows me the freedom to sort of work on projects I really care about and study the business and do podcasts like this and teach some classes and stuff like that, because it isn't, for Harvard kids, since I went to Harvard, I'll do stuff. There's no ladder. There's no process like you said earlier.
It's not doctor or lawyer. It's not doctor or lawyer.
Right. So that's what I like about it. And some days we're on fire. Like the fact that, my last big movie was Manchester by the Sea. Like if anybody said a movie about 3 kids who die in a fire and their father never being able to deal with it and, whatever, like, and then the brother dies and the nephew is homeless. Like, you're like, if you pitch that, like I just pitched it to you, not a soul on earth would ever make that movie. Right. So I get more joy out of the fact that people like that movie and that we made it and we made it honorably. And I think Kenny Lonergan's a big talent. So does Matt. That's how I met him, was through Matt. But the point is that those are not, if you were trying to manage a career, you would not say, after all the success I've had, let's go make Manchester by the Sea, right? But I just loved it, and I love Kenny, and Matt loved it, and I think Casey's a real star, and it was like, yeah, let's go try to get it made. And that's what I think happens as you become a little bit more successful. You can take a little bit more risks. Like I say to young producers who bring me projects now, I do mostly consulting stuff where I try to help people move their project along, and it bums me out that more successful producers are always trying to get into other people's projects. I always feel like, don't do that. Let them go out and see what it's like. But I'm just so fortunate, had so much fun making these things. But that sort of tornado, I'm also afraid of. I would argue that I'm probably here partly because not really sure I want to get all the way back into the tornado.
Well, listen, you also put yourself out there in a way that most producers don't by being on camera and a character on a huge show on HBO, which is why so many people, I promise you, not as many people walk up to Jerry Bruckheimer in the middle of an airport, but they go, hey, man, why didn't I get in season 3 of Project Greenlight? Like, why didn't I make it? So and for everyone listening who's not as old as us, when Project Greenlight came out, it was the first time that I can remember that a doorway was opened to the unknown, because I lived in Florida at the time. So for me, it was just like, oh, my God, somebody from Mount Hollywood is opening up a doorway for us to try to come through. And that was the idea. And for people who don't understand, the Project Greenlight was extremely popular. First season was extremely popular. And then I promise, when I appeared for 3 seconds on the opening montage of season 2, I got 20 phone calls. Was that you on HBO? Were you just on Project Greenlight? It was insane. It was insane. So and I have to give you guys credit. You guys decided to do something that at the time, I'm sure everyone said this is a horrible idea.
Well, that's why I said that's where their celebrity became really valuable, is because, a lot of this business is about risk reward, right? And, if you're running HBO, and Chris Albrecht was running at the time, and I think Chris is actually an example of an adventurous head of a programming outlet, right? He could run a studio, he could run a network. He'll hear it and he knows he's got to do programming. right? Like he doesn't have the luxury of just be like, I don't need to do shit this year. He's like, I got to put something on. So, but he could hide behind Matt and Ben, right? No one was going to say you're an idiot for putting Matt and Ben on HBO, right?
Sure.
They might say, couldn't you have come up with a better idea for Matt and Ben? But the point was that we walked in, and he'll admit this. We walked in, we were just like, look, what we're really trying to do is do a reality. And we were a little early in the sort of docu-reality show stuff too. Project Greenlight was one of the first ones that sort of was a series of watching people do shit, you know? And what we said to them was that there was this fun, we were saying, if we could put down the experience of what we went through on Good Will Hunting, right?
Yeah.
People would have been amazed, right? And I said, I can add what happened. I mean, American Pie was that way for Sean William Scott, for Jason Biggs, for a lot of these people. Like when you go through that process of not really being that person and then you are that person. Now, we never, in my personal opinion, we never really captured it because we got stuck in all the when do you release the movie and does the show keep on past when the movie comes out and what's the thing. But you're right. It was the first time insiders actually said, okay, we're going to let you see it. And the great thing about Matt and Ben as human beings is they're incredibly confident in who they are, right? So like you can hate them, you can like them, you can be mad at them, they can say something stupid, but they are who they are. There's not a sort of weird, thing. And so, and I am, as you can probably tell, and as hopefully I've shown since Project Greenlight, I'm really that guy. Like that wasn't me playing a character. Yeah. So it was like, it's sort of, so the point is that we were sort of like, we felt like we were giving back to a community that had really helped us and that what we had gone through was crazy and people should see it. But it was also awesome. Anytime you can watch people fulfilling their dreams, anytime you can be part of helping somebody get a shot to, not know this, for everyone who's working in an Amazon fulfillment center right now, I'm so happy and I'm glad you have a job and I'm not trying to belittle it, but I'm saying getting to be Matt and Ben or even me is probably better than that, right? And so when you're part of that, just like these shows that exist now, like Hard Knocks for the NFL or baseball does it, or, there's a ton of music stuff because it's a lot cheaper to watch people sing than it is to make a movie. But the point is that people love being around, watching people trying to get their dream, watching people struggle. And when it's honest and it's true, it's great. And I think that was where we came from. So that somehow came through in the show, that these are people who actually are humbled by all the success they had. They thought they deserve it, and they are super talented. But people need this opportunity. It's not, and ironically, I think Project Greenlight would be more valuable today in some ways because there's so many people struggling to get their thing done that to go do a show about how do you start now? Because as we said earlier, it's so different now.
Oh my God.
Back then it was pretty straightforward. You get Miramax to make your movie, you're Kevin Smith, you're Ed Burns, you're whoever, Robert Rodriguez. I mean, all three of those guys went through at different stages, the Harvey machine and the Harvey Bob. But my point is that that today it's even harder to tell somebody what they should do. I taught a class for AFI last semester, and it was really hard because by the end of it, people got comfortable with me and they were willing to ask me about their own personal careers. And for some of them, I was like, look, I can't tell you, and this is, by the way, why I'm not been invited back to teach another class for AFI, is I said to people, listen, if you're here for career advancement, which all education is not purely career advancement, but like I read on your website, you guys have classes, you do stuff, you're trying to help people be better at it.
Absolutely.
And that to me makes a lot of sense, right? But when you're paying all that money and you're coming to AFI, particularly as a producer, so it's not like you're mastering your skill, right? You're trying to make contacts, you're trying to learn about it. It's one thing to be an editor and get to edit 6 things during your 2 years.
Cinematographer, even director,
right?
even director, yeah.
For producer, directing, writing, the production designing program, the cinematography program, they're great, right? But where I got in trouble is I said, look, if you really got whatever it costs to go to AFI, you might be better off going to make a film. You might be better off going out and saying to those same people, look, it's not. And when you ask AFI graduates, well, what did you think about the producers? They don't graduate from AFI wanting to work with the producer they worked with in film school. They want to work with me. Right. They need to graduate up to the person that's going to help them right? And so I said, look, I can't 100% get behind. If you're trying to decide whether you want to be a producer or not, sure, take a couple classes, learn about what it's like. Watch Project Greenlight, come to Indie Hustle, right? Like the point is, there's a bunch of ways to make that decision whether you want to dedicate some of your life to being a producer, right? I just don't know that. Anyway, you can see how they were unhappy with that. It's
shocking. It's shocking. I don't understand why.
And I said to them, look, I think you should take what I'm saying and let's revamp the classes so that you're acknowledging that you're helping them in what you need to do. And they said, no, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. I said, okay, that's fine. It's not like the very small amount of money you're paying me is going to make me lose my house if I lose it. And I love AFI. They've been around a long time supporting a lot of people. So it's not that it's the producing programs in particular. It's very hard to justify what's wasting, or that's unfair, spending 2 years of your life studying it versus 2 years of your life doing it. Right? I think is way more valuable. So
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I went to Full Sail in Orlando, and it's a great technical school. And I walked out with a good amount of technical skill. I knew how to wrap cable. I knew how to make a good cup of coffee. Right. You know, the core things that you need to learn as a PA.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, and also when I went, I was 95, 96. It wasn't where we are now. It was still expensive as hell to go make a movie. You know, it was still all film, all that kind of stuff. But in today's world, you're going to learn a lot more by making a $10,000 feature than you will by spending $10,000 going to film school, in my opinion.
Mine too. So that's why I said when we first came on, I think we're going to agree on stuff because I saw that in one of your sections and I was like, this guy understands. But the thing you also got to remember about film schools, they started because the equipment was so expensive.
Right.
The average person couldn't buy a camera that was a film camera. Like Spike Lee talks about his first movie. He was like, I had to go to NYU. It wasn't like somebody's going to say, here's a film camera. Here's an editing system. Here's all this stuff. That's how you got the stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Today, that stuff's at Best Buy.
I had this poor filmmaker come on. He had a $300,000 plus student debt, going to film school. Yeah. $300,000. And I told him, and he's done. He's like, he's working, he's trying to make it up, but he'll never, ever get out of that hole. It's just going to take him for his entire life. And I was just like, oh my God, man. I mean, can you imagine if you would have taken that money and just made 20 movies?
Yeah. And that's the thing. And look, I went through it on a bigger level. I raised about $5 million for what is currently my production company called the Media Farm. And our whole concept, the reason it was called the farm, was we were going to grow stories basically from the beginning, right? Like I'm not a genius, so that's a pretty straightforward analogy. And we had about $5 million. And I was so arrogant and stuck up about, well, I can't go into podcasts. I can't, that shit's like below me. I'm a feature film guy. So how do we take this $5 million? If I had taken that $5 million and spread it across the 10 awesome podcasts or the 10 awesome, like you said, $10,000 movies or pilots or web series that came through my office, right? I literally have a library of content right now, right? That I'd be selling up the chain and just be basking in the glory of my genius. Instead, I'm here talking about how arrogant and stupid I was and that I couldn't see that this is the same storytelling that's going on. And these people are Matt and Ben now that they were then. Right. You know, I had people who become wildly successful walk in my office. Sam Esmail does all these fucking shows. AFI grad walks in. He had a great show we could have figured out how to do. You know, there's a guy whose name I'm forgetting right now, Rob. What is Rob's last name? He was like the #1 comedian on Twitter. And he created this show called Catastrophe with Sharon Horgan. I can't believe I'm forgetting Rob's last name, but he walked in one day and was like, I have this idea. And I was like, well, you know, I'm not sure how that is a TV show, but it wasn't Catastrophe. But the point is that I was so arrogant about the medium. And also with my investors, I had promised this sort of scale that spending $10,000 on a podcast wasn't exactly what they thought. They thought I'd be spending $250,000 on Manchester by the Sea, which we did. But the $5 million is going to go a shitload faster if everything is costing you $250,000 to $1 million than if you had done things for $25,000, $50,000. And I was a moron. Like, and that's part of the insider part about why I joke about Project Greenlight. And it's great what they did with it. Issa Rae took it over, and it's gonna be a whole new thing with her, and I think that's awesome. But the point is that the storytelling, if what you love, which is what I've realized I love, is storytelling and getting stories out there. There's a way to do it. And if you're thinking about being a producer where you find stories you love and you want to be part of the machine that gets them out into the world, whether it's a piece of talent, whether it's a specific story, whatever, you're better off getting into it than you are, not getting into it, I guess.
Now, which brings me to a question. If you had Good Will Hunting and American Pie today, you were the producer on it, how would you do it differently? Would you try to own it more? Would you try to hold the rights to it more? Would you self-distribute it? How would you approach both those projects differently? Or would you still try to go down the studio path?
Well, I think what I tell people now when I'm doing some of my consulting stuff is, look, the more it can exist in the world somehow, the more leverage you'll have to control it later. So if your goal is to try to control it, or at least you have a vision for it, you don't really want that vision, which, as I said earlier, was why I stopped being an agent, was because the vision is only a sales vision and then you're done as an agent. But the thing is that there are all of these other ways, right, to get something done. Like even Rob's project, Catastrophe, he tried to sell in America, but it sold in England. And I met him right at the time when he was deciding whether he was going to move to England or not, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember very clearly his agent, he having this whole conversation, and it meant that our show, we weren't going to be able to shoot because he was going to be in England, right? But I was like, yeah, man, if somebody wants to make your show, do it, right? And so what I'd say is, I think American Pie I think about a lot, because I actually think there's an update to that because I think teenagers today, and this may not be appropriate, I apologize, but I think their sex lives and their way they're losing their virginity and the way they're doing stuff is different on a macro level. Like, I don't think it's just different technology or we have different morals. I think it has gone to a whole other thing, and just having a 20-year-old daughter, a 17-year-old son, and a 14-year-old son, I just sit here and watch it, and I think, what would be the American Pie? And the truth of the matter is, I think there's a direct-to-camera YouTube, TikTok kind of version where you could have started that story with 4 friends trying to help each other lose their virginity before they go to college,
sure, and
how they help each other, and you film it with your phones, and you sort of start cutting it together, but then you see a way to then summarize it up into a 90-minute experience of whether it happened or not, or what happened. And you play the line, are these real characters? Are these just written? Are these fictional? Could have been a podcast. I think it's funnier because there's physical comedy that was really great in that. So I think visual, but TikTok in bite-sized stuff, you could interest a lot of people. And then you could go to them and say, okay, we want to turn this into something. Most likely it would have been a limited series, or like there's one that just came out called The Sex Lives of College Kids. And there's another one, Sex Ed, I think. And then, and so I think it would probably not been a one-off movie. It would have been, let's follow these guys for 6 episodes or 6, whatever. And then, but it would still have been the one story of that end of senior year. Then if it was successful, you'd come back like we did, and you'd come up with reasons they all get back together, and they wouldn't be coming of age as much as just sex comedies, right? There used to be a lot of, in my opinion, the best one is Sleeper by Woody Allen, it wasn't like people weren't doing sex comedies before, and I grew up in the generation of Porky's and Fast Times and
Revenge of the Nerds. Yeah.
And so I think some of those things, particularly because the younger audience is there, I would be recommending to people, let's put out some of this funny stuff. Let's introduce Stifler and Jim and, Jessica, which is the Natasha Lyonne character. They would have been Finch. They would have been great TikTok, YouTube sort of web series.
Oh my God, could you imagine? Yeah.
And you could have had so much fun. And then you could put it together into a bigger thing, right? And I think that's for something like that. I think Good Will Hunting, because of the nature of what it is, you would have had to try to make it as a drama right away. Like, I don't think the best you could have done, and, we joked about this, was take the screenplay and turn it into some sort of coming of age novel that was actually written by Will Hunting, and you try to sell the book and you try to get somebody to think it's there, and then people realize it's fake, and then let's make the movie. But the truth of the matter is, there's still some things getting made. Now, most likely, again, it might have ended up as a limited series. As I said, I think the limited series has created, in my opinion, just longer movies. I don't think and so the way I talk about it now, I try to convince people too, so I'm going to use your platform to continue my evangelical spin up.
Please, preach.
I think what the new term should be is one-off stories versus episodics, meaning a one-off story can still have episodes, but it's one story. The last episode will be who was the murderer, does the couple get together, do people, it's one story. Now, you may fall in love with those characters and decide to make more one-off stories with them. We've talked about how much we both like Die Hard. I mean, we're up to 6 of them, right?
God, it's not, I know.
And I think they have jumped the shark in the sense of this one cop can't be in all of these stories. But I do love John McClane as a character, right? Like, I think it's great. I actually think the new process of having a series that works and then having a movie that sort of wraps it all up, like they did with Breaking Bad, like they've done, where I think that's actually not a bad way to go, where you sort of then have the wrap up thing of it. But my point is, on Goodwill, it's either super intimate. So it could have been like, if Matt was not as well known, and he could have started a YouTube channel where he's talking directly to the camera and doing, hey, I'm Will Hunting and I live in Southie and, I'm a math genius, but it's not really what YouTube's about, right? And it's not, so then you could have done something like there's some other character, maybe it's Chucky who's trying to have, or I always joke the better one would have been Casey's character, his name was Morgan, trying to have a YouTube channel. And he's like, dude, you're a genius. You got to come on my YouTube channel. Come on, you guys. Like, what am I going to talk about? It's like, I don't fucking know. Talk about math. Talk about whatever. Just come on the channel. Can't just be me, And they're like, what are you going to talk about? How much you jerk off upstairs? Like, and that kind of thing would have been funny to get to know these guys, but it doesn't really fit to who they are that any of them would even have a laptop.
At this point, yeah, you're right.
So that's why I say a producer's job is to know a little bit about the business, to say when they find stories or they find talent that they believe in, to say, look, this is what we should do. Like, I have a friend who had a great action movie idea. And he's a pretty well-known writer. He's written a bunch of shit. He's written a Marvel movie. He's done all this stuff. And he was one of my clients early on. He's and well-known. And he went around, he pitched it to all the people, and nobody would buy it because it was brand new, big action franchise, female lead. And I'm not producing it at all, but we had lunch one day, and I was like, dude, just find somebody who'll do it as a graphic novel. It's a great idea as a graphic novel. And you could get a cool artist to draw her and to draw the thing and to create this visual. And, I always use Kick-Ass as an example. Everybody talks about, oh, yeah, they were out there and they adapted this graphic novel, Kick-Ass. Then you go and you actually look up the numbers. Kick-Ass never sold more than 5,000 copies, right? I mean, I could get a Facebook post to have 5,000 reads right now, right? But somehow in the mind of Lionsgate, and Matthew Vaughn's a genius salesman that he goes out, like he created the Kingsman. I don't know where the hell that came from, but he went out and said, we can do this. And the point is that they just had this graphic novel. And like I said, people loved it. They could show on a blog somewhere that somebody loved it. But it wasn't like there were so many fans of Kick-Ass, the graphic novel,
right,
that you could do the math of, we should definitely turn this into a big movie with Nicolas Cage, right? Like, right. They just sort of got Lionsgate to do it, right? And so my point was, and I'm just not saying names because it hasn't been made yet, whatever, but what I was saying was, look, try to get somebody to do it. So it turns out he has a guy who went to college with his friend, has a tiny, tiny little graphic novel label, right? So he calls him up and he's like, what do you think? I'll write it. He introduces them to this cool young female artist. She starts drawing some pictures. And one of these like graphic novel blogs probably has, a quarter of the listeners you have, right? Says, oh, I hear that this company is about to do this with this writer. Here's a picture of the girl, right?
Done.
7 people bid on it. He sells it for $2 million to somebody who'd already heard the pitch, who passed on it, who literally now is buying it in a bidding war because some 20-year-old Literally, he's got 200 people listening to him about graphic novels, but some young executive inside that production company is like, holy shit, this thing's about to be a graphic novel. We should get into it now, right? And so it was like, okay. But then, of course, because the money was so high, they said you can't publish the graphic novel until we're making the movie. And, of course, the movie hasn't got made, so the graphic novel hasn't come out. And he ended up in the exact same development hell he was in before, except he has probably $1 million. Right?
Okay,
so
exactly.
What I said to him was, you shouldn't have sold him the rights. You should have said, look, I'll give you a year, but if you don't figure it out, we're putting out the graphic novel. And, whatever. But the point to potentially screenwriters or producers, people might be listening to this is literally they never even made the graphic novel. They just got lucky that some, junior executive at some production company was validating his job by saying, hey, I'm on the pulse of graphic novels. I listen to these blogs that nobody else knows about. This blog, and you're like, you heard the pitch 4 weeks ago. Like, what do you mean you're on the pulse, right? Like, they should have realized they could have bought the rights from him for a lot less than that and then said to him, we're going to go publish a graphic novel, right? Like, but movie people are so stuck up that they want to wait for somebody else to say, oh, this is a good idea, and it didn't used to be that way. There was a lot of heads of studios, a lot of producers, Joel Silver, again, not the greatest guy on earth, but he read Lethal Weapon, totally unknown writer, totally unknown thing, and was like, this is an awesome movie. We can make it great. And now Lethal Weapon is Lethal Weapon.
I was talking to Richard Donner's head of his studio a while ago, and he was telling me, he's like, I go, what was it like rolling with Dick back in the 80s? And he's like, Alex, all I needed to do, all it says, like, oh, Dick wants to do it. He would just call up Warner Brothers, and they said, sure. And I go, well, what were the budgets? He's like, we never had a budget. They just gave us what we needed to make the movie. Like, it was never even a question. He goes, we were very responsible with it. We didn't go crazy, but I never saw a budget for Lethal Weapon. We just kept like, this is what we need, guys. It was a different world, but there was guys specifically, they were all pretty much men at that point, that would say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make Goodwill. I'm going to make Goodwill Hunting. Here's $25 million.
And the thing, but that goes back to what I said, not to pretend that I'm a genius, but I will just bring it back to my comment, which is that was because they believed they controlled the audience.
Right. That's a really good point, man. That's a really
meaning
good point.
The Warner Brothers guys could look at that and say, we know we can make a new hit this year, right? Which one of these projects is going to be our new hit? Well, we like this Lethal Weapon thing, so let's go try that. Right?
Yeah, it's got Dick, it's got Joel. It'll work.
And we'll see what happens. Keanu Reeves couldn't get arrested when they made The Matrix. He'd been in Bill and Ted's. He'd been a teenage star, and he still was doing some movies. But
Point Break, yeah,
and it was sort of like, okay, let's put Keanu Reeves in. The Matrix is big, cool, awesome idea. These Wachowskis, they have a real vision. Let's make The Matrix.
But that thing, but The Matrix was, if I know my history correctly, Joel is the one who pushed that through. And
absolutely.
And you needed a champion.
But that's what I'm saying. Guys like Joel, right? Larry Gordon, Terry Bruckheimer deserves a lot of credit. The point is that these guys were like, we can make hits, right? We can make it happen, right? And every now and then something would sneak up on them, right? But most of the time, you had a pretty good idea, And some of it was based purely on marketing budget. If you spent $50 million, you're going to make $100 million, right?
Sure.
Now that's a great business to be in. If I could be in that business in Vegas and just be like, every time I bet on 13 red on roulette, I'm going to win. Yeah, I'd just be there right now, dropping money on 13 red, right?
Right.
And then they lost the ability to control that machine, right? And
that's why it took them almost a decade to come out with their first streaming service, and Netflix had a huge head start because they were terrified of Netflix. Right. And they still, I don't think they're as terrified now, but I mean, it literally was like 12 years for Disney Plus to show up, and then everybody showed up then everybody has one now, but it took them forever.
They believed that it was going to be the new version of DVD.
Yeah.
And for like a year, or maybe 4 years, it was. I mean, that was the big problem with Disney is Netflix was paying them so much money to have the Disney product on Netflix,
Yeah.
that they were like, why would we ever start our own? That's just going to cost us money, and we're going to lose all this money we're getting from Netflix, right?
Yeah.
But then when Netflix started premiering stuff, right? When they started coming up with new stuff, when they started competing with Disney on original intellectual property, right? Then all of a sudden they were like, wait a minute, they're getting all this money by showing our content, and then they're outbidding us, right? And we can't, and that's the big thing I always say. Another one of my, to your point about my 3 leverage points, the other thing is that the industry has changed now to where there used to be these windows, and sometimes people read these articles about windowing and they think, this is over my head. I can't figure this out. What the hell are they talking about? Windowing, whatever. What it really comes down to is you had 3 to 6 moments to make money off your product.
Right. If
you have ever made a product and tried to sell it, the holy grail is to be able to make it once and sell it 5 times, right? Like, that's the holy grail of manufacturing, is you never have to spend any more money, but you get to sell it again. And in that late 90s, early 2000s, that's what it was. You had foreign, you had premium cable, you had regular cable, DVD. You had broadcast TV, you had DVD, right? And you had the box office. So what happened is the big companies were only focused on that first window, right? They do the big theatrical thing. The launch was what I call it, into the world. So you have a piece, you made something, you're going to launch it. You want to control that, right? But once you're done launching it, the rest of it is just gravy, right? So you had these other windows. And so they looked at all those people in the other windows as sort of the second tier, the JV, the sort of extra money, all the way to the point of something like Redbox, where I bet if you went to the head of Paramount Pictures in 2010 and said, do you even know which one of your movies are in the Redbox right now? They'd be like, no, I have no idea. Don't care. I love that we get money out of it. It's totally irrelevant, right? And that's what they all thought Netflix was going to be. Redbox, right? They were like, okay, for the geeks who want to have streaming, when the internet is big enough that they can have, big files, when people can have to watch HD, but they're never going to be in the business we're in of launching content, right?
Yeah.
And the second they were in it, Disney realized, we can't have Netflix doing that. We got to get those people to our side. And that's why I think it's changed dramatically, because now there's just launch, and then there's the whole life after launch. There aren't these other windows where you can make money. So all the people that are greenlighting material are greenlighting it based on whether they think they can make money in launch, or whether they think it's just going to be good to have in their library. And that's why I think the producers, the writers, people got to think through, where is your project in this, right? So like Red Notice, back to the movie you talked about for Netflix, that's super important at launch, to make people think they're still a big studio, to make people want to be part of it, to have new big stuff. So when you see your $13.99 every month, you're like, I get it. This is why I do it, right? And Stranger Things 4 will come out, and this other thing.
And Don't Look Up just is coming out. And
right, exactly. And the Sandra Bullock movie just came out. But the point is that's where it's changed a lot as a producer, because you really don't have any of that back end part anymore. None of that is for you. So you're either selling into the launch machine and saying this will be valuable for you over time, Netflix. Right. You'll just want to have this in your library. Or you're saying this is one of your launch projects. And all the big producers and the big writers and the big directors are trying to make sure they only work in the launch area, right? But a lot of us are going to get relegated to the, what in the old days would be called the straight to DVD, right? Yeah. And nobody wants to be called that. But, I mean, a joke amongst producers today is, if you make a movie and it premieres on Netflix, did you really make a movie? Because if nobody's heard of it, right? Did you really do it? Yeah, you got paid, but no one's stopping me in an airport, for things that get made on Netflix, right? Unless it breaks out as one of their things. And so that's what I think the whole industry is trying to figure out right now. That's why I think podcasts like this and whole communities like what you're building on your website and what you're doing with your classes and your interviews are super important, because it's whittling itself down to where, as a producer, as a writer, as a director, as a creator, performer, comedian, whoever, you have to understand where you fit into the new marketplace to make reasonable expectations for what you're trying to get out of it, you know? And that's why I say, like, if I were starting American Pie, I'd say, let's go do this stuff. You're not going to get paid for the first 2 years of this. Right. Maybe we can pay, you know, $100, or we can pay you scale minimum for a podcast. I don't know what that is, but I'm sure there is one. But the point is, you're doing it so that we promise that you get to be part of it as it grows.
Well, that's, right? I mean, that's Jason Blum's entire model. Yeah. I mean, and when I had Jason on the show, it was just so fascinating. He was just so like, these are the rules. I don't break my rules. That's why I'm successful. And that's why every single thing has to fall within these parameters. I don't care if you're J-Lo. I don't care if anything. You're working scale and you're going to get the back end. And we do pay everybody, and that's the way it works. And it was just like, that's brilliant. And he's done fairly well for himself.
He's done great.
He's done.
And I think he's actually a pretty good judge of talent.
Yes, he is.
I mean, like he sees somebody, Jordan Peele as an example. I mean, that's an easy example because now he's become Jordan Peele. But like, the point is,
James DeMonaco with The Purge.
Yeah. I mean, the point is, it wasn't like those guys weren't out here already.
Right. They didn't just fall off the turnip truck.
And in some ways, Jason is an example, and there's not a lot of Jasons now, of the Joel Silver, the Jerry Bruckheimer from we were just talking about in the 90s, right? Where they looked at it and said, we can make this a hit, right?
Right.
So Paranormal Activity and The Purge and, you know, these things. And that's why I think it's a fascinating time. It can be a little bit wild, wild west. The problem is, back to the conversation of the 3 points of leverage, as a producer or a writer where you're sort of traditionally low person, you know, on the pecking order, right? You need to find leverage because it is a business right now, because of the wild, wild west, that will try to, you know, diminish you down as the process moves forward. You know, I've been working with a group of producers to start this sort of producers union. And part of the reason we're trying to just collectively bargain is that in certain situations, producers are literally the person getting paid the least on set and have no health care and are actually legally responsible for everything that happens, but legally have no control over everything that happens.
Jesus.
So, you know, it's sort of like, again, what people say, you know, when they, you know, sell somebody a 6-pack and that person has a drunk driving accident, you know, they didn't know what they were going to do, right, with the 6-pack. You know, you set up, make a movie and do whatever, and then somebody, you know, gets COVID, or somebody in the worst case scenario gets shot, or somebody, whatever, you're on the hook. And it's like you want to really think some of this stuff through, because if you jump in using the past as the way to do stuff, you can find yourself in a really bad spot inadvertently.
Do you feel that filmmakers in today's world need to start building audience or understand them? First of all, they have to understand marketing. Before, filmmakers didn't need to understand marketing. They have to absolutely, in today's world, especially in the indie world, need to understand marketing and audience building. Because when I release a feature that I've shot, you know, I target it towards my audience, and I've built product to feed my audience, because I know that's the kind of audience. I'm not going to make Manchester by the Sea and sell it to my audience, because that's not the audience. But I will make a movie about
Jason Blum.
Right, exactly. But I will make a movie about filmmakers going to Sundance trying to sell their movie and getting it out to the audience, because like, oh, that's what my audience wants to see. So do you feel that is where the future is for independent filmmakers? I know a lot of filmmakers don't want to so many filmmakers, I'm sure you've met filmmakers like this. I just want to be an artist. I don't want to think about the business. I don't want to think about the marketing. I just want to just go be an artist and I'm done. Yeah, if you're a certain director, you might be able to do that. But I argue that even all those directors we've mentioned in this entire show all understand marketing, all understand the business of it. They James Cameron, you know, David Fincher, all these guys understand every aspect of the business. So do you agree that audience is something that filmmakers need to understand, marketing and maybe gathering an audience to be able to sell product to?
I do. And in the same way that I said, you know, pretend it's going to be a graphic novel and you might, you know, sell it.
It's such a great story.
If you have 2 million people, you know, who are following you, right? You know, but you had to be careful. You know, in The Chair, we used a big YouTube celebrity, had 9 million people quote unquote subscribe. But it turned out a lot of those people are young and they don't have credit cards and they can't go see R-rated movies. And so it didn't really translate to his movie becoming, a box office success. So you got to be careful what the followers mean. But I think the other thing, I guess the answer I'd say, so yes, for a human being who is sales, marketing, promotion, I use the term promotion because a lot of times you don't have the money for paid marketing, right?
Sure.
And so you're trying to promote your stuff in a way where you get an audience. And one way is to build your own audience. I agree with that completely. I think, though, there's also going to be a lot of room for partners for filmmakers. And that people like me in today's world, and that's part of what my consulting thing is to try to say, look, and then I think companies like, the A24s or Neon, or they're basically the promoters of the music business from 5 or 10 years ago, right? Where and they might merge up and become Live Nation and they become a bigger, distributor. But I, a lot of times tell people, look at the music business 5 years ago is always where the film business is. And it's mostly the lag is the fact that it takes longer to make movies than it does record songs. And it's a shitload more expensive. So people have to be more involved. But ultimately now, because it's no longer theatrically driven, right? We are creating digital files just like songwriters are and so the point is that so what I try to say to people is, look, if you're not going to be that person, and you should listen to a podcast, go to one of your classes and say to yourself, can I be a promoter of my own work? Because some people, they need to take a shower after they're a promoter, right? Like they think trying to talk somebody into doing something or buy something or do whatever is somehow a dirty thing.
Right.
And yeah, if you lie to people and you cheat, it is. But promoting something you believe in is a totally fair and I think great way to spend your time. And so my point is there could also be these partnerships. Like one of the things I recommended years ago to YouTube, you may remember, they came out and said, we're going to come to Hollywood and spend $100 million to get all these original, content. This is even before YouTube TV. This is just YouTube. And I said, you're crazy. Don't do it that way. I said, what you should do is, the numbers, pick your people. Because I would say of every YouTube influencer I've met, they either are a promoter, meaning they're great at getting audience, but their content's average, right? Or they're great at creating content and they're horrible at promoting. And they've risen because on one side, the content pushed them up. On the other side, I said, pick those people and merge them. Just go out and say, here's $3 million, X, Y, you're now a company, you figure out how to promote this stuff, you figure out how to make their content better and go. And they're like, well, it can't, that's all inside the YouTube ecosystem. We're trying to bring people in. And that really hasn't worked. There hasn't been a ton of crossover between the YouTube ecosystem and sort of big Hollywood. But the point is that I do think promotion is super, super important. But I do accept that there are some people that just can't promote.
Agreed.
And what I'd say is, if you're not that kind of person, it's sort of like taste. It's know yourself, right? And if you realize I'm never going to be a good promoter, go find one, right?
Amen.
Go out on YouTube, go out on whatever. Say, I love the way this person sells. I love the way this person talks about stuff. Hey, would you ever help me promote this stuff? Yeah, you might have to share a little money. Yeah, every now and then they might come up with some gimmick that you're like, this is the dumbest thing ever. And you may battle, but it's going to be a lot better than you sending out really boring emails that are going to make me say, I don't want to watch this guy's movie, right? Meanwhile, you might have made a great movie, And I think that's the, which is why to some extent comedians have built the biggest audience the fastest, because they're already funny. So you're like, I'll sign up for Louis C.K. or Dave Chappelle or whatever it is, and they can sell me stuff directly just because I'm probably going to laugh, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you talk to big musicians, big bands, a lot of them are doing it directly now too.
Oh, God.
They might have hired people to run their business, but they're not, they're taking a small piece of what the record label has to offer, not giving them 80% to do all of it, right? And so again, using the music business, I would say, I think there's going to be a lot of companies, a lot of places that become, promoters for talent. And that the new talent company will be the promoter and the talent together figuring out what to do, right? Like, and what's the best way? And that might include somebody who understands the business, right? Like, we're about to find out whether Reese Witherspoon selling her company to a private equity firm actually makes her any more money than just being Reese Witherspoon, right? Like, she obviously thinks it will, right? It looks good in a press release, but having been a guy who's raised a lot of money and had a production company that had a lot of money, I'm not 100% sure for somebody like Reese whether having money really benefits her, you know, and if it were to fall apart or times change or do whatever, it can also be negative in the sense of like, you know, what happened. Now, I like Reese a lot and I believe in her and I love the mission of Hello Sunshine, but the whole thing is like, the world is still trying to figure out where best to put the money. And I would say, if you go all the way back to the Brothers Grimm or Shakespeare or whatever, you know, fuck Homer walking around telling his poems, you go all the way back. Somebody had to tell everybody Homer was showing up to tell a story, right?
There's a heralder.
Homer had to show up and tell a story, right? And I don't think it was Homer or Shakespeare all the time, right? There were other people in that mix. And I think that's the traditionally best partnership in any creative endeavor, is the promoter and the talent.
The Grazer and the Howard. You know, those are that's the perfect analogy. Brian Grazer, Ron Howard. And because Ron's not a promoter, but Brian definitely is.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've done okay for themselves over the years. Chris, man, I could keep talking to you for at least 3 or 4 more hours, man. And you're always welcome back anytime you want to keep talking, because I have literally thousands of other questions I can ask you. But I'm going to ask you a few questions to ask all my guests. What advice would you give a filmmaker trying to break into this business today?
Well, by filmmaker, do you mean director, talent, like somebody who's not a producer?
Yeah, director, like a director, a filmmaker who's trying to get their movies made.
Make stuff and put it out. Like it's just constantly be putting out and making stuff, whether it's, you know, smaller pieces, longer pieces, trying to get it, and then, you know, find this promotional person, whether it's internally or inside yourself, or, you know, look, there's a famous story out there of a director who just basically changed his voice and created this character that was his agent, and he would call around as the agent and got himself jobs, and then finally got a real agent and had to go through the whole thing of firing his agent, who was him just doing a voice. But, you know, Hollywood is built.
Who is that guy? I want to get him on the show.
I can't say. He doesn't want people to know.
Okay.
But I'm sure there's other people who've done it. But the point is that there is an unwritten thing in Hollywood about it's easier to talk to a third party about somebody than it is to talk to the person directly. Right. Yeah. So, you know, sometimes, so that's why I say, if you find this other person, manager, promoter, producer, agent, all those are the same thing. Right. And the point at the launching of your career, but then it's put out work, try to get something that some audience has liked. Right. And make sure it's in the space where you'd like to be a director. Right. Like, don't go make some romantic comedy short thing and then come out and say, all I want to do is the next Jason Bourne, because people are, you know, it's sort of like, don't go play basketball and then say, what I want to do is be a pro football player. Like the point is, put yourself in a space where you're showing this stuff and you're doing this stuff, and just keep putting stuff out, you know? And I think as a writer, try to find a director or somebody to help you make it, right? Because for writers, it's even worse, because it's so hard right now for people. They're just not wrapping their head around the page to the screen. And so normally I would have said, write stuff, sell some scripts. But at this point, I think you still need to potentially take it one step further and make shorts. I mean, your story starts at a short, right? Like the at least on your website. And so the point is that make stuff. And if you're a writer, find a director you like. And it doesn't mean you have to be partners forever. It doesn't mean you have to do whatever. But the point is, the more stuff gets made, the more people look at you and say, wow, that's a voice, or that's a skill set, or that's a thing. But like I said, we're so either stuck up or insecure, whichever way you want to look at it. Or I think a shrink would say those two things are somehow melded together. But the point is, outside validation somehow carries, in my opinion, an inordinate amount of weight right now. So if you're trying to get in, do everything you can to have outside validation when you try to get in, as I said, even to the point of faking it, right? There's a company where they might go to jail because called Aussie Media, where the guys pretended they had all this, viewership, and they had a big meeting with an investor, and one of their executives pretended he was an executive from YouTube, and the executive figured it out.
I mean, there's a point. There's a point of where you fake it till you make it.
I'm not saying lie and do that, but what I'm saying is if people, if you are having success, let people know, right?
Yes.
No.
Yeah, no question. Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
This is more personal, or, it's larger than just the film industry, but it applies directly, which is, I think the hardest thing that I learned is I don't function well in situations that are primarily driven by financial success. Meaning that as I got deeper into the studio system, as I started making movies that really were getting made because they filled a pipeline or because they, were big enough budgets that everybody was getting paid, that I wasn't my best. I didn't enjoy it that much, but also I wasn't that good at it. Like I need to love the story and want the story to get made, to be good. And that has limitations. So part of it is for everybody out there, and this is the dumbest, even if I were out to listen, be like, fuck that guy, like, excuse my language. But the point is that what I'd say is spend a little time with a pad of paper, the voice recording on your phone, and say what it is you really love to do. You have actually a great paragraph on your website where you say, people ask me, why do I do this? And you say, I love doing it. And to me, that's the number one thing. And somebody may have said to you, you're going to make less money doing this than you are directing episodes of some show on the CW. No offense to the CW.
Yeah.
But your point is, I'd rather spend this 2 hours with me doing this thing and sharing it with your audience than doing that episode, right? And so the point is, you learned that at some point. How do you want to spend your time? And my point is, it took me the longest because you get in this thing of, oh my God, I could be president of production at a studio. I'd make all this money. I do this. And then you realize the movies you'd be making, you don't like and you wouldn't watch, but the corporate politics of it, that's what they should make. Right. And so I have the great luxury to allow myself to function primarily outside the need for a certain level of money. I have to make some money every year, and I do that, but it's not what drives every decision. And it took me a long time to accept that. It took me a long time to turn down, like as an independent producer, turning down projects, turning down paychecks is really counterintuitive. You're like, I spent the first 10 years trying to get to the point where somebody'd offer me this job. And now I'm like, there's no way I'm doing that job. Right. Like, it's so true. And so that would be the lesson I would say is if you're in the place where you're literally not homeless, so any job you need to take, right? You're not living in your car, but you're at a place where you have to be like, this is what really gets me going. This is what I love to do. This is where I think my craft, again, we're talking about people who have a real craft, which in my opinion, I don't think salesmanship and understanding the business and sort of giving creative notes is necessarily a craft. It is a skill set as a producer, but ultimately producing is more learning how to sell, learning about the business, networking, doing all that kind of stuff. So that's why I say for those people, it's getting out and putting the work out there and doing it, but it's also sitting home and saying, I like doing this better, right? Or I need to have this outlet so I can support my life. Like I always talk about Gus Van Sant, who I've made 2 movies with. And I think Gus is a real artist and he's a really great director when he wants to be, but he also occasionally goes off and makes his own movies that I don't understand at all. But I'm just sort of like, why would you make this movie? Or in the case of Jerry, which I know a little bit about because Casey and Matt starred in it, there's a whole second half of that story because it's based on sort of a real life thing. That's awesome. And I'm always like, how could you tell the story of that without going into the second story? Because I don't care about that story, right? But Gus also somewhat will be honest about, he also will go make a big studio, whatever movie for a paycheck, not just for the money, but for this is also what I use my skill set and my craft for. So he's figured out a balance in his life. And you can go look at his resume or his biography and you can see it. So my point is, you really got to spend time on figuring out your lifestyle and its relation to your career. Because if you're constantly struggling, if you constantly feel like you're failing, if you constantly get frustrated, you won't be good at your job. And so you have to set your bar on your lifestyle. And I don't think this is an unusual thing. I think every kid in college, every kid is thinking about is like, if I'm going to go be a public school teacher, you know right away what your financial upside is. Unless you happen to invent some shit in your garage in your free time, you know this is where I'm capping out, right?
Right.
And you've decided I get more out of being a teacher than I would being on Wall Street, where the cap is a lot higher. Right. And so what I'd say the answer to that question is it took me a long time, partly because it went fast. And so I never really had a chance to stop and think about it, but partly because I wasn't aware enough and I wasn't, smart enough human being. And nobody was saying this in public of better figure out what it is I really like, because this is what I'm actually good at. And, fighting and sticking out a project like Manchester by the Sea, is a lot more fun and interesting for me than it would be going and making, Red Notice for Netflix. Not that I don't like that movie, but it would be hard to leave my family. And partly that's where it gave me was leaving my kids for a period of time became much, much harder to do. And so then your bar is like, well, why am I leaving my kids for this? And that is a luxury. And I say that openly to all of your listeners and all of the people that it's a luxury I have, that I'm not going to lose my house. And what I would have done is sort of what I just said about Gus, is like, I would end up doing one thing a year where I got paid, and then I'd have this other stuff and I'd figure it out. For the last 4 or 5 years, I haven't had to do that.
Yeah. And it's so, I always found you to be a very scrappy producer. You like that. Like, I'm going to get Manchester by the Bay done, or Manchester by the Sea done. Like that's, I don't see you as like working for Marvel or, one of these big franchises. It's just not your flavor. And there's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of people look at me, they're like, oh man, why aren't you pumping out more features, or why aren't you doing more stuff? I'm like, guys, I'm happy. It took me a long time to get here, man. I was a bitter and angry motherfucker for a long, long time, because I was like, oh, I want that. I want that. I want that. And when that thing never came, or I got so close to it so many times that, I just decided I'm just going to do me. And now I'm like, hey, I want to put a movie out. I'll go make a small little movie of myself. If some opportunity presents itself, it presents itself. But I'm not chasing anymore. And man, am I so much happier. And that only comes with age, man. You can't get that. It's hard to get that.
Well, and experience, right?
Yeah, age and experience, of course.
And a bunch of that stuff had happened to you in a way where all of a sudden you were out there doing it. You might say, well, this is what I ended up doing, right? But, Jason, I don't know if he talked about the drum movie. I always forget the title of it that he produced.
Drumline?
No. He did the one where the J.K. Simmons is the guy.
Whiplash. Yeah.
Whiplash.
Yeah.
His name's on that. He was part of getting that made. He was a big part of getting that made, but it's not a Blumhouse movie.
Nope.
And he had to do it outside of his company and stuff.
Yep.
And that happens. I remember talking to Thomas Tull, runs Legendary, and he did that documentary with Jack White and the guy from Led Zeppelin and the guitar guys. He's like, I couldn't do that through Legendary. That's not what Legendary is set up to do, right? And so I'm the guy who wants to make Whiplash and the guitar documentary. So like, where's the company that's set up to do that? And there isn't one, because they're risky. There's no margin in any of them. Maybe you make money, maybe you don't. So it's people have been successful in some other place, pick their passion project and they go do it, right? And I think that that's what people have to look at is, and that's part of, again, not to keep coming back to this, but just to talk about this union, is that part of the reason producers need, I think, a little bit of a collective experience is passion projects shouldn't become only for the rich.
Right.
You should be able to be passionate about something and have a process where you can make a living. Like I said, you may only get paid what a third grade teacher in, the Omaha, Nebraska public schools get paid, right? But that's a choice you may have to make, that your passion project isn't going to be American Pie, right? But the point is, I'd rather have somebody tell me that going into it, and I can, as you said, I can make my lifestyle to fit what I like to do, but I can actually make a living. Again, it may not be this living, but it's this living. But I can be happy because I set the expectations correctly, right? And that's the part that is being missed right now, is people are looking at somebody who's like, oh, I should make $50 million a year. And it's like, very few people are going to be making $50 million a year as streamers take over, because it's going to be much more, you get paid your fees up front, you're doing programming for these big multinational machines, and hopefully there'll be a small independent business, just like, again, the music business, right?
Yeah.
You know?
And I agree with you 100%. And I've told that, I've been yelling at that from the top of the mountain. I go, guys, we're all not going to be millionaires. We're all not going to make studio movies. You know, Spielberg, Nolan, Fincher, there's a handful of directors who get to play on that sandbox. You've got to build out something that, I go, if you made $100,000 a year, if you made $50,000 a year and you live in Kansas, in the middle of Kansas somewhere, is that enough to put food on the table, to support your family, and be happy? And can you do that while making movies? Holy cow, you have won. You have won 110%. You don't need to make $1 million a year, or $2 million, or $5 million a year. And that's where people are so upset and depressed and angry. And I was that way for years, over probably 10, 20 years of my career. I was always angry because I wasn't that guy. But when I finally figured out, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, how much do I actually need to make to be happy?
Right.
Oh man, that changed the whole game for me. And now I'm super happy. And then now I get to talk to people like yourself, and you know, and make relationships, connections, and you know, look, if I would have told myself in 2005, hey man, you're going to sit down and talk for a couple hours to Chris Moore on a podcast, and I would have said, what the hell's a podcast? But I would have been pinching myself. Or if I talked to any of the amazing guests that I have on my show, that's because I found my happy place. I found my happy place, if you will. And that's what everyone needs to find for themselves.
Right. And that's why I think it's a tiny bit bigger than just the film business, but it's very true for the film business, because finding your happy place in a business that is a little bit more like the Wild Wild West is hard, because it redefines itself, you know, every time a new gunslinger comes to town, right? Whereas, you know, if you're in the public school system in Omaha or Kansas, you can see a little bit more of what the process is and what's going to happen. If you decide to get into academia, I mean, I flirted with that. I taught at AFI, I taught at NYU, I taught at UCLA. I was like, maybe this is the future for me, because I do love sharing. Project Greenlight came out of me and this young guy, Alex Collegian, talking about how could we capture it? What could we do? Could we fake it? Like, I still believe in this. Why I would come do a podcast with you, right? Is because I'd like to share my experience for one macro reason, which is I don't think every producer needs to go through all the shit I went through.
Amen.
And I don't think they need to go through everything you went through.
Amen.
And I think that if as an industry, we didn't think that there was some secret shit. That's why I like RB, who I think originally introduced us. Yes. You know, Stage 32 always does this kind of stuff.
Friend of the show.
Yeah. And I love them. And RB's like, look, I'm struggling. I go out, I learned all this stuff, but like, why should every next guy who's a writer, actor, whatever, coming out of New Jersey have to learn everything I learned from scratch, right? And I think that's the industry should do more of that, where we help people. And that's what one of the parts of Project Greenlight was about when it originally happened, was why should everybody go through it completely blind? As you said, no one's going to have the same experience Matt and Ben and I had with Good Will Hunting, right? And we never recreated it in Project Greenlight. I didn't recreate it in The Chair. There was you can't recreate it, but you give people an insight. Like, one of our favorite things we used to get in the first couple seasons of Project Greenlight is people would write to us and they'd say, I'm so grateful to your show. And we'd expect and then I wrote my screenplay and now I'm going to USC Film School, whatever. But what they would say is, you completely convinced me I don't ever want to work in Hollywood. And we would always say, yes, that's part of the game. We
saved another one.
Exactly, right? You know, that's another doctor. That's another guy who...
It's an engineer, somebody.
Right. It's like but they feel happy in that job because in the back of their mind, they're not constantly, I should have gone to Hollywood.
It's not look, man, this business is not for the faint at heart. It's not for everybody. I call it a sickness, a beautiful sickness that we have, because it is. And once you're bitten, you can't get rid of it. And it's really hard, but it is an absolute insanity. I had a guy on the show who lost his house, 6 kids, because his first movie died at the box office. He mortgaged his house. I had to move back into his parents' house with 5 or 6 kids. Yeah. And he said to me, the only thing I was thinking was, oh my God, I'm never going to get to direct again. I'm like, is that what you were thinking? You're insane.
Yeah.
And then,
and if you've ever been part of a 12-step program, which I will admit I have been, that's exactly what happens when you sit in those rooms.
right.
I'm in jail. I've wrecked my car. My wife left me. And all I'm thinking about is how soon can I have another drink?
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is fucking what happens in this business. You're like, I lost my house. My wife is pissed. My kids are homeless. And all I can think about is how do I get to direct my next movie? Right? Like, and that's part of why I think what you're doing and what I would like to do and what other people do is it's part of why it's so important. Because again, you want to at least give them a resource to make an educated decision before they end up living in their dad's house because they thought the business was reliable.
Oh, God.
I mean, and they made decisions and worse, a lot of times, I don't know where he got his money, but I'm sure he had more money besides the mortgaging of his house that he probably owes people money too. Or like the person you talked about owes $300,000 from film school. Like that's the other thing. You go in this debt, it lives with you forever. It doesn't. And that's why I feel so fortunate that I'm not sitting here. You know, I was able to pretty much pay everybody back. And in the cases of where I wasn't, I was at least we made one or two things that people are proud of helping me get made. And that's it. But that's why I'm not out raising money right now, because I couldn't say to somebody, what's the best way to use money right now? Oh. And I just don't think there's a way that money makes you more money. That's why I made the comment about Hello Sunshine. It was like, I don't know what they do. And I think Anna Perna is a perfect example. She got all the money she needs and you can't figure out what to do with the money. Yes, you can greenlight and do stuff, but then you end up losing that money. And so then, you might as well make it a charity. You know, you might as well just say, this is pro bono film finance, right? Just like a lawyer says, I'll go take this case for free. Okay, I'll produce this movie for free. And
then you know what? It's so awesome that you said that because it's not about just the money. Because you're right. You could have, if someone gave a filmmaker $100 million, you could give it to 10 different filmmakers, and 10 different filmmakers will either going to make $100 million movie or you go with Jason Blum does is like, oh, I'm going to make like 50 to 75 movies with that. And I'm going to make money with it because this is my system. Yeah. But it's no guarantee. But there's no guarantee. This is the only business in the world that you can spend $100 million and you have a worthless product.
Yeah, and have zero. I mean, when I say
what's zero?
I have friends at this age I'm at. Some of them are wealthy, like they've done real well, and they're starting to fade out of their jobs, and they're thinking, "What should I do?" And of course, there's always some friend who's a movie producer or some friend who wrote a movie who calls up and says, "Hey, man, why don't you finance my movie?" And luckily they know me well. They'll call and say, "What should I do?" I said, "That's the last thing you should do, right? like unless you just want to give this person money." Right. Or unless like I had one situation where a person was going through a divorce and they were like, look, I need to have less money so that I don't have to give it to my wife because I hate her. Right.
Fair enough.
Like, okay. Well, I can find the movie for that. Right. Like
all day.
But the point is that that's not that often, you know?
Sure.
But I think that's the thing is the more podcasts like yours are out there, the more there's honesty. People will be able to make smarter decisions about what it is. And the industry will start to divide out that thing of, okay, if you go in this part of the business, this is what your life's going to be like. Just like if you decide you want to go in academia, but you decide I want to teach at a private school, or I decide I want to teach at public school, or you decide you want to be a college professor, right? Like, college professor can be a great job. If you get tenure, they can't fire you. You're getting paid $100,000 to $300,000 a year, and people think you're a genius, right? So if that's what you want to do it, But I think that's the funny part is, and again, I'm the worst person to be giving this advice because I got so successful so fast that I never sat down and had to think about it until I was somewhat, 20 years in and was like, now it's getting a little bit harder. Do I really want to do this? Matt and Ben are big stars. Am I going to go out and find the next Matt and Ben? Or am I going to keep going down the road? I didn't want to keep going down the road with them because the producer for movie stars, and this is no offense to anybody who's doing that as a living right now, but the point is you're really there to facilitate whatever it is they want to go do. To your point about taste, you're giving up your taste to that person, which isn't bad if you agree with their taste, but my experience is you never agree with everybody all the time on shit you like, but the point is that the more people can listen to something like this and say, okay, let's take 20 minutes after this podcast is over. Let's just think about, what have I liked over the last 10 years? What have I been really good at? What has the world told me I'm good at? What is what lifestyle do I want? Right? Do I only want to make 50 grand a year and live with my dad? That guy, whoever it was, sounds like, yeah, he's okay with that. I'd be willing to bet that he didn't explain that to his wife when he got married and had 6 kids, that all I want to do is direct and lose money.
He did, by the way, happy ending. Took him 7 years. He built all their businesses up. He got back out. He made another movie, but he was a lot smarter about it the next time around.
Yeah.
But it took him a minute. It took him a minute to come back out. It took him a minute.
Yeah. And that's the point, is he probably had that moment. I'm not a religious person, but I spent a lot of time in churches, so I always call it the come to Jesus moment.
Yes.
Is what they used to call it. And the thing where whether it's you had a failure, whether there's too many options in front of you, whether somebody offers you something you're not quite sure, whatever it is, everyone ends up in that come to Jesus moment of, is this really what I should be doing? And there's a lot of factors: lifestyle, family, time, health, all that. Plus, what do I like doing, and what are people going to let me do? Right. And I think the more you can sit down in any version of a life, but certainly in Hollywood, because it is wildly unpredictable. And the thing that's funny about Hollywood is it's even unpredictable if you take the more predictable route. Like if you become an executive, you still could get fired at any time. Oh. Pretty much if you're a lawyer, an agent, if you work at one of the big management companies, you can have a relatively predictable way, but you're also trapped in that situation. And a lot of people who are interested in Hollywood are not people who are interested in being trapped. So
right, exactly. And I'll ask you one last question, sir. 3 of your favorite films of all time.
Well, we talked about Die Hard.
Obviously.
I also love Clockwork Orange, which some people think is crazy.
Amazing.
And the next one. Yeah, see. I just think that movie is a perfect example of how to be about something, but also be a really fucking good, scary, sort of interesting movie.
How in God's green earth did the first 20 minutes of that thing pass any sort of censorship in the 70s? Can you imagine if the first 20 minutes of Clockwork Orange would show up today?
Oh, yeah. It would be NC-17 and you know. But it's also so clearly one guy's view of violence, which I'm interested in. I'm afraid of random violence, and I think that whole study. So to me, I like it that way. The third or the next 3 or 4 are always hard because, again, back to what we said earlier, it's sort of mood related. Like I do really love Peter Jackson's Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. Like I can go back there and I get sucked in. I think Chris Nolan's pretty much most of what he's done. I'll be honest, I was a little confused by Tenet and Inception, but there's a filmmaking skill. I don't know if I like this next one. You know, sometimes directors go, they stretch their muscles in a way that the average, but there's a chunk there, and particularly the Batman movies, but even, the movies before that were really, really well done. And he's dark. I like, some of that stuff, but it sort of then becomes more popcorn, sort of fun movies. I've seen, some smaller movies. I mean, I always joke that I tell my kids all the time, one of my favorite younger movies was Babe, the first Babe.
Oh, of course. Of course.
I think the Road Warrior series that George Miller did were awesome. Even this most recent one with Tom Hardy. I grew up, as I said, in a small town. My parents got divorced, blah, blah, blah. But I sort of escaped a lot of that by going to the movies. And, literally the year they got divorced was 1977 when Star Wars came out. And I watched that movie 11 times in a row.
Oh, yeah.
In over 4 days in theaters. And just wanted to believe I was out there fighting the empire, and I believe movies still have that power to take you away or give you a chance or do whatever. And it's the same, it's close, not the same year, but in that it's close to another horrible, another much rougher movie that would have trouble getting made, but it was one we talked about a little bit with Manchester by the Sea, was Ordinary People,
God.
That's just a horrifying, sad, traumatic. And now as a parent, I can't watch it, but in my younger days, I was like, they're brave to go out and talk about this. And it's easier to experience what's happening here in the movie than it is in real life. So I'm a real believer in that. And I think that's that to me is the biggest sort of use for these stories. Recently I've loved these limited series. I've loved a lot of the stuff that has come out. I tend to right now like the British ones and the sort of Scandinavian ones more than I like the American ones. But, my wife is producing the Luther movie. They're making a movie now that starts at the end of the Luther show. And I love the Luther show. And I'm so happy they're making another Luther because I think that's a great character and I'm psyched to see it. So there's an example.
And I agree with you, man. Like with Nolan and Fincher and these kind of guys, they're taking swings at the bat that just there's not many people given that opportunity. There is only one Nolan. No one's getting to do the Oppenheimer $100 million movie.
Right, and that's why look. Spielberg's taking a little bit of hit for his West Side Story, but he did an unbelievable job. Yeah, and he's taken swings and. It's literally one of the best made movies I've ever seen. And the story is the story. Like for anyone to be somehow shocked in the sense the thing's been around forever. Like they didn't change it completely. And to me, watching an expert who also brings in experts, not like Tony Kushner's a bad writer and these guys and the performers are great and whatever. And you're like, that's what you want to see. You want these people to go, I'm psyched for Jim Cameron's Avatars. I wish they would come out. And those idiots are just waiting for COVID to go away and waiting for them to finish. But it's like, I want to see great filmmakers do stuff.
Yes, exactly. Chris, man, I am so grateful for this conversation, man.
It was a lot of fun.
Man, I argue this is probably one of the most important conversations that filmmakers should listen to. I swear to God, man, there's so much gold. Nice. There's so much gold in this, and up in these hills, sir. I do truly appreciate you, my friend.
Given the list on your website, I would say it's sort of I'm third tier, but I hope people listen to it. And I really appreciate what you do for the business as a whole and for talking about it. And, I'm going to listen to a bunch of them because I think that group of people that you've had are also experiencing a change in the business that they didn't. And I'd recommend trying to get Kevin. I'm willing to write to Kevin Smith if you want, if you've tried.
Amen, sir. I've been trying to get through to Kevin for the longest time.
He may not do it because he has other podcasts or whatever, but Kevin fits into this story.
But he does podcasts, and I think when Clerks 3 comes out, hopefully he'll want to promote it.
Well, but please write it. Help with that.
Thank you, Chris.
Because I think he'd have a lot based on what we're talking about, and I know him enough to write him and just say,
I had Scott on. I had Scott on, and Scott was.
I love Scott.
Scott is anyway.
He's the best.
Brother, I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.